see so many familiar faces because I am Canadian, and I was born in Saskatoon. I'm going to Saskatoon actually on Sunday night, and to be with old friends. But it's great to be in Canada, because Canada's destiny, as we know from having a leaf on our flag, is to be a leaf of healing for nations. And so you'll notice that most Canadian apostolic leaders or prophetic leaders end up going to nations. And it used to bug me so much. I used to go, all of our best leaders, they all just leave. And I thought, I had a pet peeve. And I had a real pet peeve when they went to America. That was my worst pet peeve. Like, why would they go there? And anyway, now I'm there. I have a green card there, but I still have my Canadian passport. But so I just wanted to say that it's so good to be home. My dad had his 90th birthday on the 7th of February, and so I actually was in New Delhi with a team of Shiloh leaders that had been booked long before my family decided to do a last-minute birthday party. But anyway, so I wanted to go back and see him as soon as I came back. But it's there from Saskatchewan. Anybody here from Saskatchewan? Come on. Yeah, I was born in Saskatchewan. And I have a series of messages that I'm carrying inside of me. And I have a mentorship, as you can see. I mentor hundreds of people in the prophetic. We have almost 400 people in our Shiloh company. And you can look into it if you want to join the mentorship. I believe prophecy is a critical gift right now in this season that everybody needs to be equipped to hear the voice of God for themselves, but not just for themselves, to actually get revelation for what to do in a very different time frame. Okay? We are living in for years, the Lord spoke to me about this new era. I had prophetic signs. I felt like I was a voice crying in the wilderness because I was one of the only ones that I would ever hear talk about the things that I talked about. And now we know the new era is here. Everything is different. But how do we live in this very, very different time zone? And that's what I want to start with tonight. And over the course of this weekend, I want to build to create prophetic models. Because the Lord told me, I don't want you, Stacey, to just prophesy with words in this season, and which I have always done all my life, prophesied over people, prophesied over churches. He said, I want you to build models that prophesy. That as this thing functions, it actually carries such a spirit of revelation on it that people that watch it function, they catch that spirit of revelation and they can go build it wherever they are. So anyway, we're working on a number of different models. I will be talking about this probably tomorrow night. But we're running our first business seminar. And you can all come. It's in Santa Maria, California, or you can watch online. You can sign up for my mentorship at shilohcompany.org if you're interested in that. And it's my goal to equip people for the great outpouring of the Holy Spirit that the Bible talks about, that is going to fall one day on all flesh. All flesh, not 120. That was only the beginning point. All flesh. And at that time, what are people going to do? Old men are going to dream dreams. Young men are going to have visions. Men and women are going to prophesy in that hour. And we must get ready to prophesy, because people will need encouragement, courage, revelation to know what to do in a time of great tumult. And so we have to be ready. We are the head and not the tail. We are not under the circumstances. We're not, controlled by circumstances. We know what God is doing, and we follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And so we are a people of his presence. I have to say, you were the worship leader? Amazing. I love worship leaders that really worship. not just sing the songs and have skills, but really worship. There's always a tangible atmospheric difference. So I just really appreciated your worship tonight, and the whole team. Thank you. And it is so good to be back with Catherine Nash, whom, it's been a long time since I've been here, but we always connect. I'm shocked that it's been so long since we've been here. This is the new era. We're now launching something good, and now it's gone to the next generation who's leading everything, and that's wonderful to see your leadership, Johnny. You were just knee-high to a grasshopper, and not really, but you weren't that young. But anyway, last time I saw you, now you're leading everything. And so I said to him, which I say to almost every pastor when I come in, what are the protocols, anything you want me to do, how do you, I'm under your authority, blah, blah, blah. But I increasingly realize that, the next generation is taking this huge place of leadership. And we're really moving to a different era where the next generation is leading and we are serving their leadership. So I really meant that. I really am under your covering here, so I appreciate it. But I'm going to roll out this weekend. I'm going to start with where I feel we're at in this time frame. This is a Sons of Issachar conference. That's the name of it. And you all know what the Sons of Issachar did. That was that tribe, the Sons of Issachar, it was their mandate to understand the times and know what Israel ought to do and know what the people of God ought to do. And I feel, as I was saying, that a little bit I felt like a voice in the wilderness talking about a time that was coming, that now is well here, that when I was talking about it, I was be saying things like this in 2017, 2018. I would be having these prophetic signs. I'd be saying it, but everything seemed like business was as usual. And I said, there's a time that is coming that when we get to that time, we won't be able to go to the past to get into the future. That it will be so different that some of it has never been done before. And we need a revelation. You can't pour new wine in an old wineskin, or else you'll lose both the wineskin and the wine. And we need new wineskins to carry what is happening in this hour, a whole new way, new leadership. There'll be positions that are jostled, but don't worry. You will never, ever lose your position with God. You can only grow closer and deeper, but even as things get shifted, it is so that we follow the Lamb wherever he goes, because he's our real leader. He's the real one that is taking us this. And when we live in the presence of God, it really means, as Revelation 14:4 says, that we follow the Lamb wherever he goes. That is a huge principle in this season. To find the presence of God Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, not just Sunday, not Friday night at a conference, but to be able to find the presence of God everywhere you are and then move with what he tells you to do. I was talking to Julie, we're at the head of the Prophetic here. She drove me so nicely, and she was saying, that she's just getting all these prophetic words as she goes out to a restaurant, and she was telling me a testimony of prophesying over a waitress, and the waitress, before she even got the word out, burst into tears and came back and talked to her and told her about her whole life. And that's where the prophetic is going. It's going into restaurants and not just treasure hunts as a planned event. It's just wherever you are, the word of the Lord is going to bubble up and help people because people need help. And so wherever the cloud moves. So I had this prophetic word, and I titled my sermon, A Time for War. And it comes out of a prophetic word that I'm carrying right now. And I launched this prophetic word at the Apostolic Council of Prophetic Elders in Dallas, Texas, with Cindy Jacobs. She leads it. And Wesley was saying to me, I was writing my notes as I was the night before what I was going to speak on. And Wesley said, "What are you going to speak on?" And I said, "Well, I titled my sermon, A Time for War." And he goes, "Ooh, that's a little intense, isn't it?" And then Chuck Pierce opened the conference, and all he talked about, we are in a season of war. And it's not just this year of war, but this is the year of war, not just this year, but a decade of war. And I said, I was like nudging Wesley, but anyway, but we know that the new era is different than the past. And in the past era, we were in a prolonged period of peace. And how many of you know that we operate differently in a time of war than we do in a time of peace? It actually takes a different mentality, a different strategy, a different understanding. And we know from the Bible that there are seasons of war. The Bible says clearly that there is a time for everything. Ecclesiastes 3. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. And this is a time of war in the natural and in the spiritual. It's not time to retreat, but to advance into society and change the cultures around us. God is starting, the alarm is being sounded, and tonight I'm here a little bit to sound an alarm. Okay, that's sort of what prophets do, Joel, to sound the alarm. And for years, I ran international calls. Chris Bernanke was there with me. We went to Brazil. Did you come more than once with me to Brazil? Yeah, a couple of times with me to Brazil and his wife. And we did calls all over the world, but we were basing those on Joel 2. Sound the alarm, blow the trumpet, and the prayer movement began to gather. The houses of prayer started with a day of prayer, moving to a house of prayer, moving to a culture of prayer in nations, and we're seeing that. And we know from the Bible that full bowls release the scrolls. Right? We've heard that phrase. How many of you have heard that phrase? Full bowls release the scrolls. How many of you know what that means? When the scrolls are released, have you ever read what the scrolls are? It's really bad. Yeah, you read it. They're all judgments. So the increasing global prayer movement is potentially hastening the day, but it's actually opening as the incense arises, it's filling the bowls, and God is going to purify the earth and cleanse the earth of all of the immorality. I mean, it can't go on forever. We know this from reading the Bible, from reading the Old Testament. The four major prophets of the Old Testament, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, all prophesied one great judgment in Israel's history. And they're called, in theological terms, the major prophets, because they're the ones that had the longest books, etc., and prophesied the same event. But they prophesied the Babylonian captivity, every single one of them. Isaiah, 100 plus years out. Jeremiah, 70 plus years out. Ezekiel actually went into the second captivity with the rest of Israel. There was first and second captivity. And then Daniel, under judgment by God, prophesied by God, because of the sin of Israel, becomes a leader in world empires and takes a 70-year-old word from the prophet Jeremiah, decades-old word, 70 years old, and goes on a 21-day fast to see that prophecy actually happen in his lifetime. I mean, this is how God works. There's redemption in every season. First, he says, change, repent. Don't let this sin take over your nation. Stop. And I mean, it was pretty gross sins. If you look at, when he took Ezekiel by the hair and put him in the holy place and all the gross stuff that was going on in there. Uh, uh, and his mercy was going for decades and warning and saying, this is coming, it's coming, it's coming. And then when it finally came, he took one of the young people and then, as well as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, raised them up. And that one became the leader of the magi, the magicians, the sorcerers, all those people. You can read it in Daniel chapter 2. And counseled wicked world empires that the complaint of Ezekiel, I think it was, why are you using them? They're worse than us. Like the bad guys were leading. And anyway, it's really a fascinating concept, how God moves redemptively in every situation. But and I'm saying that because we have biblical precedent for seasons like this. Hi, Daniel Knorr. Now, he does reading the Bible. You've got to actually sign up for his reading the Bible. You need to learn to read the Bible in this season like never before, because faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. And I think we're moving into an hour, whereas the Bible says that men's hearts will fail them for fear. In fact, I was just talking with Catherine, and we were talking about next generation, how so many of them are having panic attacks and moving into fear and, really being immobilized by fear because there's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, bad news coming off on all the airwaves. And so we need faith. So sign up for his Bible read-along program. How do they do that? BibleReadAlong.com, okay? It's amazing. So you can sign up for that. And I have to endorse your book, by the way, so I just got that request. But we have passed now. Now we're not saying it's coming, now it's here. So the question is, how shall we then live? And I'm here to sound a little bit of an alarm because 2.5 years ago, in 2020, months before the Ukraine war broke out, the Lord gave me a prophetic download that I actually typed out and sent to different leaders and prophetic people, and it just came as a download where the Lord gave me snippets of prophetic words that I've been saying for decades, for probably 30 years, and they came in one kind of download, and I just started typing, and I typed this all out, and I'll read the prophetic word to you from July 18th, 2020. This is before a lot of this stuff happened, and then I want to unpackage it a little bit to give us an understanding of this time, that it's a different time. Like subconsciously we know it's a different time, but I hear a lot of Christians just talking as though it was the same time. It's a different time. It takes a different mindset. It takes a new wineskin. It takes a different way of thinking. It takes more revelation. We have to build something that hasn't been done this way before like it was done in the past. Anyway, after getting off a call led by Dr. Ed Silvoso on July 18th, 2020, I got off the call, and there was almost 1,000 transformational leaders from many nations on it. It just went down, and I felt compelled to write down in black and white prophetic words that I've been sharing for the past few years about what I felt was coming. And God took me back to words that are on like prophecies that I've had since the early 90s, late 80s, and they're on our Praying the Bible CDs with Lou Engle and Paul Kane and Mike Bickle, and you can download those off our website. But the Lord revealed to me, back then that He knows what is coming. He knows the days that are ahead of us. And He said, that the enemy would come to kill, steal, and destroy with wars and rumors of wars. These are words of Jesus. He talks about a time when this is happening all the time. And though we have seen it in church history, it's not the fullness of what the Bible talks about has not yet happened, okay? And then the Lord told me at that time when things were shaking with wars and rumors of wars, an overcoming generation would arise, loving not their lives unto death. And they would do signs. And they would do wonders. And they would change society, and society would not change them. There is coming such an outpouring of miracles that's going to hit the streets. It's going to hit, it's not going to be just in stadiums. There is coming such an outpouring of miracles from this generation that they are going to have so much faith to see revival like we've never seen it before. And God showed me that the days of greater works and greater love were coming. And this was verified by a supernatural sign in my own family. 2013, the Lord, Chuck Pierce had a word for 2013 at the head of the year. And in that word, it was Judah will go first. And I have a son named Judah that broke his neck in a rugby game in October 2013. And Sammy Robinson prophesied a week before that. I was at your church, in Bonnieville, at your guys' church, with Sammy Robinson doing a conference. We'd done this ministry time together. We were debriefing in the green room, and all of a sudden, Sammy said, "Stacey, I just had a vision. There is a wave of healing that's coming that's going to hit your church." And he said, it's so big. He said, it's going to happen. He said, like, it's so big, like the lame will walk, the blind will see kind of thing. And it's going to affect 1 million people before Christmas. He told me that October 7th. October 13th, no, he told me that September 29th or something. And October 5th, 1 week later, my son was playing rugby in Kelowna, got tackled in the ruck, and broke his neck and instantly became a quadriplegic. Now, when I got that word from Sammy Robinson, for the first 2 or 3 nights, I waged war with that. I took all the other prophecies about healing coming in our church. I believed them. I put them in my spirit. And I said, yes, Lord, I receive it. Lord, let it affect 1 million people. I forgot one thing, though. In order for the lame to walk, somebody had to be lame. Yeah, when your son, you get the phone call from emergency. I was doing a conference in Wisconsin, and I got the phone call from Wesley. He said, Stacey, it's really bad. It's really bad. He said, I've talked to 3 neurosurgeons, and they said that we can fix broken bones. There's absolutely nothing we can do for spinal cords. Your son has a severe spinal cord injury. They sent in the social worker. 98% chance he would be a quadriplegic for the rest of his life. Quadriplegic. Can't move. He said, but Judah's awake. Do you want to talk to him? I said, of course. He puts the phone up to Judah's ear. And I said, Judah, it's Mom. How are you doing? And he said, I'll never forget. He said, Mom, I can't feel anything. I can't feel anything below my neck. And the first words out of my mouth, because I was months in John 5, the lame walking. And I read the Bible not to get cognitive knowledge, but to try to actually do it. And since I'd never seen the lame walk, I couldn't get out of John 5 because I thought, the pool of Siloam, why would I read it? And I was praying all the time for wheelchairs, and I never saw one, so I'm not going to move out of there until I somehow grabbed the faith for that. But a spirit of faith came on me, and I said, Judah, things that are impossible with man are possible with God. I'm going to go pray. And long story short, 5 weeks minus a day, my son walked out of that hospital pushing his wheelchair. But that was a sign. That was only a sign to a buildup of something greater, that Judah will go first as a sign that there are miracles of lame people going to walk, such great miracles that things that are impossible for neurosurgeons, they can fix broken bones, but they cannot fix injured spinal cords. And anyway, we are moving into that, and we need somebody here to say, I'm going to be part of that generation that is going to actually do the greater works than Jesus, because Jesus himself prophesied that. And we're going to read the Bible not to get cognitive knowledge, but to actually be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving our own selves. And so everywhere since 2013, I've been preaching that a monumental shift is coming to the world. I described it, I said it would be a shift greater than we've seen in 500 years. I described that communication was about to change from personal to virtual, okay? What happened in COVID? Boom. We only went totally virtual, Economic systems were about to change to digital economies. Since that time, whole governments have actually added digital economies, and I think it's going to increase. And I think the coming economic volatility is going to actually launch us into a different era. And especially, this was part of the word, that the dominant superpower of our era, the USA, would lose its number one position and be replaced by China. Now that, when I was saying that was so far left of center, like it wasn't even feasible in the mind. And I actually had a major prophet say, Stacey, we can't publish this because this will scare people. Anyway, but I had right in the middle of this word, the two great dangers, but I'll get there anyway. And I said there would be Africa would begin to rise and stuff. And I gave several reasons for the shift, not the least of which was the impact of the suffering church in China. Because I've, met with the Heavenly Man, done events with the Heavenly Man, talked to George Chen. And so I have some firsthand knowledge about a lot of the suffering that the Chinese church has done. And as I was typing this word out in 2020, the Lord began to speak to me about the suffering of the Chinese church and likened it out to the suffering of the early church with the first 12 apostles and how they were persecuted and how they were thrown in prison, and then miracles and Acts, the prison doors shook and they all came out, and massive, and all 11 of the first 12 apostles actually were martyred in their lifetime because of the persecution. And Paul was a persecutor of the church, born out of due time. You all know this from the Bible, and replaced Judas. No, actually, there was the other guy. They drew lots and replaced Judas. But Paul actually became one of the foremost voices. And the only disciple that wasn't martyred was John, who was exiled in Patmos and got the book of Revelation during that season. And so, and the Lord was giving me all these analogies that the suffering of the early church actually birthed a whole new era. And because they loved not their lives unto death, and they just were consistent over decades and decades and decades, by 200 years later, after the death of the Apostle John, Christianity became the dominant religion of the all of Europe. Actually, it used to be the dominant religion of Egypt and the Middle East. Syria, Antioch is in Syria, as you know, and North America, and has remained the dominant, and also Latin America, but that wasn't discovered yet, obviously. But because of the faith of the early church and the reach that it had, it influenced the whole world. And it came birthed in suffering. So that was my point, because in the era of peace, nobody liked to talk about suffering. Nobody wanted to hear sermons like that. and it sounded so far away from where we live in our daily life, and it's still a little bit far away. But it's coming a lot closer. And so we have to prepare our own hearts. We have to get deep in the Word of God. Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the Word of God. We have to eat. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. And then I said in this word in 2020, however, 2.5 years ago, I began to have explicit personal signs that the church was moving into a whole new era. This was before people were even prophesying it. God showed me that once this era hit, we would not be able to go to the past. Everything would function differently. I preached this everywhere I went. And I said we would need new models for the church, new mindsets for the future, new economic paradigms for nation, new governmental structures to contain what's coming. And I said this new era would accelerate very quickly into an almost unrecognizable way of doing life compared to the last century. So everything's shifting. And really, we've already seen the first stages of that with everything going virtual. I mean, people are not doing work the same way they did work before. They're doing it from home. Everything is shifting. Even it's working its way into the daily lives of people. And I said this new era would be brought about by military power, digital economies, and a shift in the way technology monitors human interaction. I don't want to get into that now. And then I said clearly, there will be war. This was before the Ukraine war. There will be war. But he knows what is coming. And I said elements of the new era would include the demise of the U.S. as the lead nation of the earth. Now, when I say that, what I'm trying to say is I don't believe the U.S. is not going to exist. I mean, if you know history, I mean, the Mongols, I've been to Mongolia. The Mongolian Empire, back in its day, was the largest landmass empire ever in the history of the world. To this day, the Mongolians had the largest landmass of its empire on land, okay? Like successive, consecutive, they conquered all the way into Europe, and it was all under the Mongolian rule. Now Mongolia is a strategic country in the middle of China and Russia that has had a huge revival in the 90s. We just had a Mongolian apostolic leader in our house last week, and it's so strategic because now it's from having almost no believers, 4 known believers before the revival. Within 2 months, they had 40,000 believers, and then it spread everywhere. And it's actually a strategic country, but it's insignificant in its influence now. The British Empire used to be the largest in terms of global, I mean, they had Hong Kong, they had the Falklands, they had the Caribbean islands, they Australia, Canada, much of Singapore. They had a huge empire that went, and now it's still significant, but it's a island off the coast of Europe in the middle of Brexit, and its influence is greatly diminished. So this does not mean they don't exist. It just means the shift of influence and who's going to take the lead step now. And this time of change is the fastest time of acceleration, and if the church is aware of the time that they're living in, they will be prepared and become the head and not the tail, like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, when times are changing and we're moving into empires that aren't as godly as the ones in time of peace. Okay? The Lord began to tell me there'd be a change in the structure of the church, forced by both government and economics to move from a location-based movement, which, we all think of church as a building we go to a relational discipleship movement, meeting anywhere and everywhere, influencing the society around us. And this wineskin will be critical for to contain the massive harvest that's coming. We are going to have a harvest in this hour. It's already begun. It's already started. Just in the last 2-3 weeks, it's already starting. We are going to need more disciplers than we've ever needed before. We'll need them in the homes, in the marketplace, at lunch hours. We'll need them on the university campuses. We need them. And so they come to church to be equipped. The fivefold here, we come to be equipped so that when we leave the building, we equip the saints so they do the work of ministry when they leave the building. This doesn't stop. We add to our faith. We add to what we're doing so that it actually takes on a different emphasis. Instead of coming and spectating, we're equipping and mobilizing. Okay. So, and I think that we're going to start seeing millions of ecclesias, which is a ruling, discipleship-oriented small group, in all parts of society. So I said also at this time, so tonight I'm sounding the alarm, a little bit of the background, okay? I'm trying to get us to see the season that we're in, the era that we're in. It's new. New means new. And when COVID was over, God's great design was that we would learn how to function differently when we couldn't physically meet like before, so it would shook it up a bit, okay? So that we would actually be ready for what's coming. It's really, and the great dangers, two great dangers in this time, and I wrote this right down on July 18th, 2020. Well, the first one would be to move into fear. And we're already seeing a generation begin to be immobilized by fear. This spirit of fear is everywhere. There is a spirit, literally, it's like the demon of fear has been unleashed. But God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind. I mean, we have a sound mind that's so rooted in God that it doesn't matter what's coming. He knows what is coming. Okay, so if we move into fear, hence we'll lose sight of what God is doing and not seize the hour to make disciples of peoples and nations. It is a time to totally seize the hour because other people are afraid. People that don't have God are really afraid. There's so much shaking going on. Everybody's feeling it everywhere, and there is a fear that's unleashed, but it's actually opening people. They have to have something bigger to rely on than their job and their security and their relationship that got very, very challenged living in the same house in COVID. Wesley and I were doing a lot of programs. Somebody said that, I love when you and Wesley do programs. Because they said, I was watching one of your programs that you uploaded. And I don't know which one it was, but this happened every time. We didn't know what we were doing. So we're not techies. And we didn't know what we were doing. So we had to buy all the equipment and buy all the cameras and buy all the stuff and take our message online. And so Wesley would have to film, and I would teach something on the prophetic, and we actually launched Shiloh Global in the middle of COVID. And they said that I was online and I was smiling away, starting the program, and all of a sudden they could tell that Wesley must have been talking to me because they said I would be going like this, so, and I stop talking, and then and I can't do that, and then I go back to smiling. So here we are, and that's really how it actually was. But we were learning new skills that we'd never, ever done before in order to continue to get the message out. Our entire life has been itinerating for the last 20 years. For 2 solid years, we could not leave the house. Oh, yeah. Anyway, we could hardly go out. And so the great danger is to move into fear. And the second great danger is to do nothing, be immobilized, and wait for things to go back to business as usual and go back into the same pattern that we were doing before the great change came. Because God was prophesying this. God knew it was coming. God said it ahead of time. God has been speaking about these things through his prophets for a long time, and because we can't see it, it just, Charlie Brown's teacher, but we need to hear this. As sons of Issachar, we need to hear what's going on. And I believe even that local churches, who do not seize this transition time, we're actually moving out of that now, but to seek God for new wineskins, will lose their voice. And a lot of churches, when they opened up, they didn't have a church anymore. When things opened up after COVID, a lot of churches completely actually ceased to exist. And so there's new communication systems and stuff that we have to use. So because God is actually advancing, and what a lot of the statistics I read was that when COVID hit, online searches for Jesus went up by the millions. The lost began to look for God like never before. The longer the shaking moves on, and now we've moved out of COVID into war. There's a Ukraine war. There's a threat of something bigger. There's, the threat of China and Taiwan, the threat of this going different places, and who knows how it's going to happen. But it's like the plagues in the book of Exodus. There's one thing after another thing after another thing. But it does not matter what happens on the outside, because we are rooted and grounded in the love of God. And perfect love casts out fear. And the more that we worship God, like this wonderful worship team did tonight, and actually find His presence in every situation, then we are moving as lovers into society, helping all the fearful people and preaching the gospel with our lifestyles, not just with our words. This is an awesome season. Don't you see that everything that can be shaken will be shaken, so that the things that cannot be shaken will remain? And so possibly the most important thing for believers is to move into new ways of thinking, producing new ways of doing things. Is this the time, I asked at that time, spoken of in Daniel 12, are we entering, as Daniel 12:1 says, a time of distress such as the world has never seen? Where those who are wise and those who lead many to righteousness, Daniel 12:3, will emerge. Come on. There's a generation of evangelists that are coming up. They're going to lead many, many to righteousness in this time, When the books that have been sealed up, Daniel 12, are opened, Daniel saw things back in his day that the angel said to him, seal up these things till the end of time. Men will go to and fro across the earth, and knowledge will increase. Kind of sounds like now. Those books are going to be open. I believe we're moving into such a time of revelation. Everyone who's seeking the face of God is going to fall on a generation. Revelation of God that we've never seen. Revelation of the kingdom like we've never seen. As God is purifying the earth, that the revelation power is coming to build His kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. There is going to be amazing, amazing things coming at this time. And so, but we have to be asking for it. We don't have because we don't ask. I ask God, when you open those books, I want to know what's in them. I ask, show me what's in that book. So I prayed that for years since I prayed the book of Daniel. Show me. I want to be there. I want to be receiving what's in those books at that time when you open them back up. And Daniel, as you know, was so powerful in Babylon. I mean, his whole nation was slaves. Yet he got chosen to, communicate not just to Nebuchadnezzar, but to Xerxes and Darius, 3 successive world leaders. He was right at the top counseling Putin. Come on, let's get some mindset. Who's asking? Let me be the one to counsel Putin and Xi Jinping. And whomever else is doing bad things. That may be that one. We have to start thinking like the Bible wants us to think, having the mind of Christ. And Daniel was so powerful. We're talking about this, Julie and I, that Daniel I was talking with the guy because I'm doing this business seminar. I'll talk about it tomorrow night. But I was talking to a guy today from Google. And this guy, we were talking about how the world is moving from, how it used to have an agrarian-based economy, and it moved to an industrial economy, and then it moved to, a financial capital economy. It's moving now and has moved to a knowledge-based economy. So the people with the most knowledge and data are the richest people in the world. Facebook, Google, those companies are the richest because we already have moved. Knowledge has so exponentially increased that the people with the most data have the most money. So I was talking to an executive from Google today, And we were talking about this, and he is the most Daniel in Babylon-esque guy I've ever met, because Google has made him the head of the interfaith department of Google. So he's the head of all the Buddhists. He's the head of the Wiccans. He's the head of the this. Like Daniel in Babylon, when Daniel was the head of the Magi and the sorcerer, because he had the revelation and could answer the king's dream. So Nebuchadnezzar put him in charge of all of the Magi, all the magicians, all the sorcerers, all the bad guys. Daniel was in charge. Come on. There is a holiness that is so holy that when prostitutes are at your feet, that when Wiccans are underneath you, your holiness affects them and they don't affect you. There is a power that is so great. Greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. And so this guy has been made the charge of the interfaith department. And you know, in Daniel's day, he was the head of the Magi, and he discipled the Magi so that 500 and 600 years later, when the very first people to worship Jesus were the Magi from the east that were waiting for that star that had been told to them, the revelation of Daniel. Come on. That's where we're going, folks. This is where the prophetic is going. It is moving into such revelation in this time and season. There's dark days and there's glorious days. Anyway, since that prophetic word on July 18th, 2020, the United States has experienced, this regional areas of civil unrest from both sides of the political spectrum with Black Lives Matter and January 6th. Europe is already in war. Rumors of war are increasing between China and the U.S., which could trigger a much bigger global war. Brazil just experienced a very volatile election in dividing both the church and the nation. And it's time for war. In fact, I was last night, where did I put this? Where did I put that quote? So last night I'm typing out my notes. I'm saying, okay, Lord, what do you want me to say? And I was copying something, and I don't know. Maybe I was on Facebook. I don't remember what I was doing specifically where this came up, but it said Prophetic Conference 2023, and I rarely have time to listen to other prophetic words. But it said Tim Sheets, and I didn't know who Tim Sheets was. And so I looked at it, and it was at Oasis Church, and it was just the end of January, Tim Sheets 2023. And so I was typing and doing other things, so I was just listening to it in the background, and he was saying some things that were happening. And then right after him, Chuck Pierce came up, and he did his message. And when Chuck Pierce began to speak, he said, I have written books that by 2025, he said, since 1986, I was caught up into heaven. Now, I didn't know this until this morning or last night when I listened to it. And this morning at the airport in Kelowna, I typed out this part, but I don't see it anymore. And he said, since 1986, I was caught up in the Spirit, and I saw China attack the U.S. And he said, I don't know if it will be. He said, either there will be a direct attack from China on the U.S., or the U.S. will be like China by 2025. And he just quoted this prophetic word at the end, in his January 2023. He said, I've written books on it. It's out there. How many of us have heard Chuck Pierce say that? Not me. I've never heard of it. I never knew that he was saying all that. And if I have heard him say it, it kind of went in one ear and out the other. And he went on to say that he was caught up and he saw China cross the Bering Strait into Alaska. And then he described how Alaska is on high alert. All the prophetic intercessors are sensing that an invasion could be imminent. And he said, I saw it in the spirit go into Alaska, down through Canada into Montana, and from Montana over across the whole eastern seaboard. And he said, just now, that's the exact trajectory of the balloon. Wow. He who has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. And I'm just as guilty because I didn't know that. I didn't know that he had said that. And he began to say it. He said, I've got books written about this for a long time. And I want to say that what God sees from heaven, he's looking for who will stand in the gap. He's looking for intercessors. We are with the Nashes. Do you know Father Nash was Charles Finney's intercessor? Are you guys related to the Nash history? We don't know, but I mean that's a great revival history that you have there. And what we are seeing is alarming to me. As a prophet, it's alarming. Because we are watching the rapid decline of Christianity in Western nations and the targeted persecution of Christians in those same nations. In historic Christian nations, Christians are now being persecuted via the media and the government in some of those same places. Gay marriage is now legal in many nations. The USA just elected their first transgender governor in November. Abortion, though overturned nationally in the USA, is still being fought for in some states. Canada, just was all over the news. A 38-week-old baby in the womb was just aborted, and it's fully legal in our country. Increasingly, democracy is being threatened. I've been saying for 10, 15 years that the right's gotten righter and the left's gotten lefter. This is not a good trajectory. You know, economic crisis is looming. I am in this Shiloh Global Business Seminar. I have some of the top economic people in their fields in the world, and I interface regularly with them on their prayer teams and prophetic teams. And they are saying that there's, you know, the people in the highest levels of knowing say it's not a good prognosis. And we know from history that there's a correlation between economic meltdowns and world wars. I quote from an article written just 3.5 years ago, entitled "The Globalization of War and Global Economic Crisis." So, the globalization of war and global economic crisis. And that this is the title of the article. And then it says, "Is there a relationship?" ? And it's by Global Research, okay? And it concludes, after all of the preamble and thesis and hypothesis and antithesis, it concludes that there is an intimate relationship between the globalization of war and economic crisis. This long war against humanity, quote unquote, is carried out at the height of the most serious economic crises in modern history. It is intimately, so global wars are intimately related to a process of global financial restructuring, which has resulted in the collapse of national economies and the impoverishment of large sectors of the world population. So, you know, this is what Chuck was saying. And Chuck said that by 2026, Satan's goal is for the USA to look like China. So, I mean, this is something, and Chuck quoted, I just found this article where what I typed out from what he said at the airport. He said, MSN came out and said, if something doesn't change, MSNBC, says, if something doesn't change, we will be in war with China by 2025. We're now in 2023. And Chuck said that in this process of what's happening, what God is working on is you. He's working on me. He's working on each one of us. What's our faith level? What's our fear level? What's our revelation level? What's our hearing level? What's our love level? What are we doing about this? Are we hoarding? Are we blessed to be, or are we conduits? What are we doing, okay? How should we then live? And I will say this, that it's a common era, even in the time of Jesus, is to fight with human weapons. And we see that if we move into the fight with human weapons, we end up with not good results oftentimes. Even in the time of Jesus, it was the temptation to fight with human weapons. James and John tried it, Luke 9. Jesus steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. I'm reading from verse 51 in Luke 9. And he sent messages before his face. And as they went, they entered a village of the Samaritans to prepare for him. But the Samaritans did not receive Jesus. And when the disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them as Elijah did? And Jesus turned, because they wanted destruction, okay? And Jesus turned and rebuked his own disciples and said, you don't know what manner of spirit you're of. For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And it's a temptation when there's gross injustice to actually do something back. But by the end of 3 years of walking and living with Jesus, all John can talk about, that same John that wanted those people destroyed, was love, 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 and you little children, and all, and after living with Jesus, he was completely transformed into the disciple of love. Greater love has no man than this. And the ever-present danger is to do the right thing the wrong way. You don't know what spirit you're of. Peter did it. He cut off the high priest's ear. When they were going to attack Jesus, the temptation to get defensive and to say, not on my watch, And so one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. And Jesus said, put your sword back in its place. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Don't you think I could fix this if I wanted to? I could call on my Father. He would at once put in my disposal more than 12 legions of angels. But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled? Have we read the Bible? The whole Bible. What's going to happen? We know what's coming. He knows what is coming. He's actually set it in motion, How then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way? Amongst the disciples was Simon the Zealot. He was a political fighter amongst the disciples. And all of the 12 were martyred except John, who died not as a son of thunder, but as a lover in exile. And then, what I'm not saying here, so hear me correctly. I am not saying we do have weapons. We must use them. The Bible also calls us an army. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal. They're mighty through God. They can pull down strongholds. We must pray. We must tell the truth. We must preach the gospel. We must teach righteousness. We must advocate for justice. We must be in the courts, on the news, in society, saying the truth all the time, no matter what happens to us. I'm not saying roll over and don't do anything. I'm saying take the weapons that are righteous, not so we don't end up with a January 6th. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. And then there was Jesus, the one that, he actually disarmed the principalities and powers by the cross. He actually took up his cross. He was nailed to a cross. And he tells us that we are to take up our cross and follow him out into society where it's hard, where it's difficult, where we will be persecuted, where if we stand up for the truth. I was talking yesterday to a uber wealthy and influential Asian business person. And they were telling me that their company got a new CEO or something and began to compromise on a business ethic. And this person said, I made an appointment with that boss, that was, that CEO, and I confronted them that there was unrighteousness and there was not integrity in the financial process and transaction. And they said to me they might lose their job. They might actually lose their job because this company is so big and so powerful, and even though they're the biggest wealth maker for that company, the person, when confronted, did not apologize, but actually flipped it and made that, my friend, the antagonist, instead of the one showing mercy by prophesying the truth so that the company could change and be blessed. How many of you have ever tried to do the right thing and suddenly you're the troublemaker, you're the bad person, it actually flips on you, you become persecuted by speaking the truth or doing it? Now, we have to do the right thing the right way. We have to speak the truth in love. We can't be arrogant. We have to be humble. Well, all those kinds of things, But so I'm just tonight sounding the alarm. I'm going to get to models that prophesy and times where we're going through the rest of this week. But I want to say in conclusion that it's time for war. We think differently in a time of war. We understand that we have to be advancing in a time of war because we cannot retreat. If Ukraine retreats, they will be taken over. We have to have everybody, all fighting men on deck, as it were, Every single person in their sphere of influence in society being leaven, light, and salt as much as they can with all the weapons God has given you. And we have to, it's the warfare of the cross, laying down our lives for the gospel, laying down our reputations for the gospel, and for one another, and even for our enemies. And last week I was, actually not, a little while ago I was in Berlin, and I was with Brother Yun's son. So I've done a couple of things with Brother Yun. But how many of you know who Brother Yun is, the heavenly man? You read his book. He was the most tortured man in China, with the church. And for years, he was put in prison and taken out of prison, and he would be put back in for 5 years and 15 years and 2 years, and then he'd get out. And anyway, it's a very miraculous book. You should get the book and read it. It's very inspiring. But Brother Yun's son grew up with no father because his father was in prison. And I was in Berlin speaking at a conference with Brother Yun's son. And when this fatherless preacher, he's also a preacher, talked about his father, he didn't talk, you can imagine being raised, and his family was also persecuted, even though they weren't thrown in prison, his mother and him, that they were persecuted, they lost all their rights, they did everything. He had zero resentment for his father. He had nothing but honor for his father. And he took up the cause of Christ in another generation, preaching as radically as he can because of that. And I think that the Lord is trying to get us to places where we're not leaving a fatherless generation by choice, but actually laying down our lives for the gospel so that the next generation has a greater hope than we have. Our warfare is humility, unity, laying down our lives. Matthew 5, Colossians 2, disarming. He has made us alive together with him, Colossians chapter 2, having forgiven you all your trespasses. Hallelujah. Don't you love that line? Having forgiven you all your trespasses, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us. And he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. And while he nailed all our transgressions to the cross, he disarmed the principalities and the powers. He made a public spectacle of the devil, triumphing over principalities and powers by the humility of the cross. That is the God that we serve. And when we behold him, we are transformed into the same image until we become like him. Come on. And we are going to fight for our nation. We are going to fight for the next generation. We are going to fight for righteousness. We are going to fight whether we're persecuted, whether we have to turn the other cheek, no matter what we have to do. We are preparing our hands for battle, our fingers for war, because we, the Canadian church, are not going to lie down. We are going to stand up. We are going to stand in this time of war, and we are going to see a reversal of the things that happened in a time of peace. We have to be bold with our preaching. We have, I just was in the middle of, F-18's always sending me things, and I'm trying to, write these, our Senate just passed something bad, which I found the draft in my email. I had it half written in it. I only had 2 days to write it, and I didn't get it sent. But every weapon we have, we should be writing letters to the editor. We should be out on the streets. We should be witnessing to the waitresses. We should, like Julie, every single weapon that we have, and the gifts of God are weapons. Prophecy is a weapon. Preaching the gospel is a weapon. The Bible is a sword of the Spirit. Righteousness is a weapon. Evangelism is a weapon. Teaching is a weapon. And we use all these gifts to actually advance the cause of Christ and not let Canada be overrun. I'm concerned. So tonight, my message is sound the alarm. Get yourself ready. There is a generation coming that does not know the God of their fathers. We have lost a generation. And I have a friend that's on the Family Mountain, and she said there's an organization now called something about grandparents with faith or whatever, and it's now becoming the grandparents' job to teach the grandchildren faith because the parents have almost lost faith entirely. Like 80% of them or higher have left the church and no longer go to church. The grandparents. Come on, grandparents. Let's give it up for the grandparents. For the hoary head. Okay, so we're going to move. If I could get some of the worship team to come up. Tonight, I want to strengthen you. Chuck Pierce said on the video that I watched this morning, or whenever I watched it last night, said on that video that the answer to this season is you. You are the answer. Not the preacher on the stage, not the worship leader. Your worship in the public place, your Bible reading in the public place, your prayer in the public place, your witnessing in the public. You are the answer for your neighborhood. You are the answer for your family. And God wants to use you like never before. This is not a time to retreat. This is a time to charge. It's time to charge. It's time to take everything that you've learned on a pew and put it into practice Monday to Friday. It's very important. So I want the prophetic teams to come up here. Julie, Chris, Monique, some of my Shiloh companies here. And we are going to encourage you, because when you come to church, you get equipped so that when you leave the church, you do the work of ministry when you go. That's your job, okay? In the market.